Hi, this is Misha, and this is another episode on Beretta pistols. We did one earlier on the 3 early guns in 9x19 Glycinti, and you probably want to check that out if you haven't watched it, because it'll help with this one quite a bit. This video is on the simple, smaller guns in 7.65 32 auto, and to some extent 9mm Corto, the Italian designation for 380. Being at the end here, we have the first. This is the Model 1917. Then we have the Model 1922. Then we have the Model 1935. Then we have the Model 70. And finally we have the Model 81. The last two aren't named for their year like the first three. As stated in our first video, before World War I, Beretta was not a handgun manufacturer. Its chief arms designer, Tullio Marangoni, designed the 1915 as a simple blowback. In fact, I think I still have it on the table. Let me pull it over here. Why not? This one here, this was in the first video, as a simple blowback gun based on the Ruby, firing 9x19 Glycinti. Now, they made fewer than 16,000 of these, although the vast majority went to the Italian military, so they were successful for being, although heavy, quite compact, very simple, very dependable, great for the trenches, World War I. However, 9mm Glycinti was not used much by anyone else besides Italy. So, a short time later, the Model 1917 was introduced, firing the much more ubiquitous and common 7.65 Browning 32 cartridge. This is essentially just a scaled down, about 3/4 scale, 1915. Now this is marked on the slide 1915-17. This is the patent date. The actual model is 1917. It has a 3.5-inch barrel versus 4-inch on the full size. But we have the very distinctive early style Beretta top slide with the front sight mounted on the barrel. We have the bridge in front of the ejection port here. We have the same style of safety for the frame. However, we've gone away from the secondary safety back here, as on this gun. Yeah, see? Still have the same type of magazine release. Essentially scaled down mags, open-sided, very Beretta iconic. This gun has a pretty weak return spring. I need to replace it, but it's fine for what it is. Not too weak, I guess. Anyway, simple blowback for 32. That's Jim Dandy. We have wooden grips instead of being checkered. These have vertical serrations with the Beretta logo in the side. And we have a sling swivel, a lanyard loop there. Now what's interesting, obviously this doesn't need the secondary spring buffer, it's on the full size, but also the firing pin doubles as the ejector. You can't see it, sorry, but the firing pin actually pokes out as the cartridge is coming and throws it out. Here's your extractor here. It extracts, it holds it against the face. The firing pin is forced forward to knock the casing out, and then it retracts back into the slide as it goes forward. The first time I owned one of these, I thought my firing pin was sticking and was rather concerned. But they did that to make it a little simpler, although I'm sure it's not. It's a little hard on the firing pin, I bet, but it is a 32. But yeah, these went into production 1917, and Beretta would make them in large numbers, at least much larger than the 1915. They would produce about 55,000, roughly 700. Many would go to the Italian military, mostly the Navy and the fledgling Air Force. They liked 32 caliber. The Army more or less stuck with the 9mm guns or the old Bodios, but I'm sure the Army did acquire some of these as well. More than that, Italian police acquired these during and after the war, and this was a relatively good success as an export gun for Beretta in the 20s. They would keep making these until the early 20s, and they would sell off old stock until the mid-20s. But this was their first really commercial 32 caliber gun, which was becoming a very popular caliber in World War I thanks to the gun like the Savage 1907, the Walther Model 4, the Dreiser gun like the 1907 Dreiser, of course the Ruby, and so on and so forth. 32, really World War I was kind of the war for the 32 because automatics were a newfangled thing and they worked, they were simple, they did well in the trenches. After the war, Beretta began working on an improved version. Now this one is slide marked 1915-1919. Again, this is a patent. So the patent was filed for the updates in this in 1919, or at least granted. However, this is the model 1922. It was introduced as they were wrapping up 1917 production. It's the same gun, but we've done some updates. Most importantly for the Beretta line, we've gone to the first time to the true Beretta open-topped slide. We've gotten rid of the bridge in front of the ejection port, and we've moved the front sight where it's on the barrel here to the slide on this one. We still have a concealed hammer. We've redesigned the safety a bit, but it's still essentially the same. We've gone from wood grips to pressed steel grips, which I think are just super cool. And we're still firing 32. This one has a much stronger spring in it. This gun actually belonged to a friend for a number of years, and I eventually got it off of him. The mags are a little updated, but still interchangeable. And we're using still the old style angled mag catch. Now this gun, we don't really know how many were made, but it was pretty dang popular for Beretta in the 20s. They would produce these until at least 1932. And they would make, based on serials, and this is a very rough guess, guys, about 43,000. They would see some purchase by the Italian military, but also several other police and military agencies in Eastern Europe and parts of Africa would buy in varying quantities. And these would be sold in America. Interestingly, Romania would be quite a big purchaser of these, as they had purchased also the later 1923 in Glycinti. Yeah, this is kind of the interwar transitional gun. Now, I should have brought it back out for this video, but we can throw up a picture and you can check out our first video. The 1923, which is back in 9x19, will introduce a exposed hammer. We'll also go with a new rounded mag release. So it would have some adaptations. Now what they would do next, and I don't have one here because they're quite rare, but the next model in the series would be the model 1931, which is essentially just like the 1923, but scaled back down to fire 7.65-32. It would have the exposed hammer, it would have the redesigned mag release, and so on. The 1931 was a transitional model. They would make about 3,000 of those, so not a tiny number, but not a huge number. And they were most famously purchased by the Italian Navy. Smaller quantities would go elsewhere, including to the Italian Air Force, as would have been with the 1922 and 1917. But again, it was a transitional model. Next would come the 1932, which was really just a 1931. They had a little bit of an overstamp and a little bit of a rework. And the 1932 was extremely similar, except it introduced a new grip angle and a few other minor refinements. And that would lead to the model I'm holding here. Now, up to this point, 1932, the Navy and the Air Force are going with 32, 7.65. The Army is using 9x19 Glycinti officially, and both are using older Bodios and 10.4mm as auxiliary weapons. Well, in 1935, the Italian Army officially replaces 9x19 Glycinti with 9x17 Corto, which is just 9mm Kurs short or 380. They realized that the trade-off was worth it. They could go to simpler blowback guns. They wouldn't have to risk people putting 9mm Luger, Parabellum in the 9x18 Glycinti guns. It made a lot of sense, and it let them kind of standardize because they had so many different guns in service at the time. Now, Beretta was working with their designs. They took the 1932 designs, and they slightly scaled them up just a teensy bit, and came up with the 1934, which is this gun, but in 9mm Corto. A little bit thicker slide for the 9mm projectile, and it held 7 rounds in the magazine instead of the standard 8 in the 32 guns, but otherwise was the same. Now, what I'm holding is the 1935, which obviously was designed very shortly after the 1934. This is a 32 7.65 caliber version. Essentially, this is a continuation of the 1931-1932 family, and so much so that Beretta kept on the same serial range, but they considered the 1934 and 9mm Corto to be its own new gun, because this is really the first time they're getting heavily into the 380 market. So these two guns come out. The Italian Army adopts Corto. And in 1937, the Italian Army adopts the model 1934 and places an initial order for 150,000 with Beretta. However, the Navy and the Air Force, who've been using 32 successfully and have lots of older guns still chambered for it, don't want to switch to the new cartridge. They're not using 9mm Glycinti. They don't need to replace it. 32 is working for their kind of PDW needs. So they go with the Beretta 1935, this gun here. This one was actually made right after World War II using World War II parts, but same as this. And this is really a culmination of all those models throughout the 20s and early 30s. We have the exposed hammer with a half cock notch, still single action only. Trigger system is almost the same as the first ones. They've updated it a little bit. We've gone to a new kind of swept back grip angle. We've gone to the rounded mag release, but we're still using the Beretta open-sided mags. This has the flush base plate. There are some that have a finger rest. We have the Beretta open top slide. Really the same safety. It's a little different. It rotates 180 degrees now. Oop. A little deeper, a little more aggressive serrations. We've added a beaver tail in the back. Still have a lanyard loop. And the grips have been improved. You know, they went from wood to metal. They experimented with the Bakelite. But what they ended up doing with these are Bakelite grips that have a steel backing. So they have the benefits of Bakelite and steel. Really great grips, very durable. You don't find too many that are cracked compared with other 1930s Bakelite gripped guns. The reason Beretta really got into the .32 market and later .380 was the success of so many guns in the interwar period, namely the Walther PP and later PPK. Now these are the first double action, single action guns, whereas this is a traditional single, but it was cheaper and it is still a compact, reliable little gun. And you just start to see a huge mass of these guns appearing. Another good example would be the French MAB Model C and Model Ds that came out. And of course other German companies would get in too, like Sauer and Mauser and so on and so forth. So Beretta got in. Now what's interesting, at the time Beretta was not an international name. These guns were not well known outside of Italy, and if they were, it would have been more likely to be in Eastern Europe and a little bit in Germany and some in Africa because of the Italian influence there. But this was not a well-known gun in America and most of the rest of the world. Now, as I said, these started to be created for the Italian military in the late 30s. One of the early users, Italy would send about, I can't remember if it's 1,000 or 1,500 or whatever, but they would send a few to Finland, who they would use against Soviet Russia during their conflicts in the 40s. They would also have a purchase order from Romania, who had been buying Italian Beretta guns for quite some time. And obviously after Italy had all of its troubles, it first was a reluctant ally of Nazi Germany, and then it was split in two during a quasi-civil war, with the north being German, the south being with the Allies. So the Germans would place a contract, quite a large one actually, for the 1935. And the reason the Germans went with the 1935, they did not care much for .380, 9mm Kurs as they called it. .32 was kind of their secondary cartridge after 9mm Parabellum. So they received a good number, and you'll find a good number of Beretta 1935s with Waffen amps. A very few 1934s, I admit, but a very few. I'm sure they were just what was on hand, and by that point, 1944, when this was happening, Germany couldn't tear down any guns. Now, of course, these guns made during wartime would have lower fit and finish to begin with, and the ones made under pressure, let's call it, from Germany, would have even lower fit and finish. They would also do some Parkerized, phosphated ones, in addition to blued. But the war would end. And you would think, having .380s and .32s in service, we would end after the war. Most people would go to a true locked breech gun if they weren't already using it. Not Italy, though. The 1934 especially, and the 1935 to a more limited extent, would stay in service for a very long time. Beretta would continue manufacturing this 1935 until 1967, producing over 525,000. Many went commercial, some of course went to the Italians, police and military. And they would continue producing the 1934 until 1980. And they would produce over 1,080,000. So a very large number, all told, over 1,600,000 told. Even more impressive, the 1934 was standard issue in the Italian military until 1990, which seems pretty ludicrous to be equipping your soldiers with a .380. However, think about it. It was a self-defensive gun. The pistol was becoming more and more marginalized. First the submachine gun, and later assault rifles were replacing its usefulness. It was still a good defensive gun, and they already owned them. They didn't have to put money into them. close range 380 is still plenty effective. And to keep in mind, they couldn't use hollow points in the different 9mm NATO guns that would come later anyway. They still had to be ball ammo. Light, easy, dependable, easy to service, keep going. It makes some sense. The economization made some sense. And that certainly wasn't the end of the product line, although that was really the end of the true military types. The Model 70, now, was not actually adopted or created or anything in 1970. It was actually first released, or at least shown off, in 1957, but Beretta was going to a new naming convention at the time. And this was the last gun that was designed with some input from Tullio Marangoni. He would pass away in 1956, I believe it was. This was supposed to be the continuation of the 1935 line, which began all the way back with the 1915. And it's also a scaled down version of the Beretta 1951, which is a 9mm Parabellum pistol, but which is a story for another day. As you see, it has a lot of similarity in its appearance. We're still a single action with an exposed ammo. Still have the traditional Beretta slide. But we've gone to an alloy frame. This is something they experimented with on the early 1951s, although they went back to steel because of the 9mm and the alloy of the day. But alloy was plenty good for a .32 caliber 7.65 gun. We have kind of Walther style wraparound Bakelite grips. We have a push button type safety, kind of like on a lot of shotguns, some rifles, kind of interesting. You'll see this on the 1951 as well. We have a mag release down here at the heel, but not all the way at the bottom. It's on the here to grab it. This kind of harkens back to me, to the Glycentes location. And we finally are going away from the open-sided magazines. We're going now to a solid-sided mag, with the finger rest becoming standard. One other thing this features is a slide lock. The other guns, the slide lock was either manual or was held open by the follower only. This has an actual device, and it even has an actual release. Now see, this is takedown here. We've changed the takedown manual, and we have our slide release here. It's a small little button, but it's better than nothing. And it again is from the 1951, as is the basic takedown method. This is still a blowback only gun, but all these Berettas have very nice, very easy takedown methods. You can see me taking this one apart in the first video. They're all very nice to take apart. While this was never adopted by the Italian military as such, it was extremely iconic in the hands of Italian police during the Cold War era. It's a lightweight, has the history behind it, but it's a little lighter, a little more comfortable grip. And Israel would actually purchase these in large numbers as well. And these would be a commercial success. In North America, sometimes Beretta would market this instead of the Model 70 as the new Puma. They would also introduce the 70S, which had an updated firing pin and safety system as time would go on. They would get away from this cross-bolt type safety and go to more of a slide-mounted type. And they would go away from these kind of brown-red grips to a black type. And late production guns would have a thumb rest on the grip as well. So they would alter the design, and they would do these in multiple configurations. They would do them in 380 as well. And again, because this is a commercial gun, they did them in all kinds of finishes and stuff. It was really this gun and the 1951 that took Beretta from being just a company known in Italy and a little bit outside to becoming an international name. But it was the next series of guns that pushed it from name to superstar, really. Now this is the Model 81. This is the more modern FS version. This is a pretty modern production gun. And this is essentially a scaled down M92 FS. Now we're not getting into the 9mm guns in this video, we'll do that in a different one. And this was supposed to replace the Model 70, and it eventually did. These would be released, I believe, around 1977. And there would be a whole family called the Series 80 family that they would do with these. This was really one of the first really popular conceal and carry guns in America in the 80s too. Now the Model 81, like this, is in 7.65-32, and it has a double stack 12 round mag, so it's pretty high capacity. We're going from 8 rounds in most of these in 32 to 12. We're using an alloy frame. We have a double single action with exposed hammer. We have a safety Decocker system. This has changed over the years. Early ones would have a slide mounted single-sided safety. As time would go on, they would move it around. They would make it an extra slide, and they would go to this frame. Early ones would not have the decock feature. We would add this later. But you get the idea. More modern safety system for carry. We have a really nice extended beaver tail in the back. Polymer grips. We're still using this very iconic Beretta open top slide, which, you know, see it starting to appear with this one. And very early on, we've pretty much, where did I set that critter? We pretty much got it going on with this one. Then we added a hammer with the 34-35 series, which is actually very similar to the hammer we're still using on the 81 here. Barrel length is about the same on all these. 3.5 to 375 about. We're going to an alloy frame with this one and a more modern safety. And we have the slide hold back, which is carried over to this one, of course. Doop, with release here. Like I said, this is essentially a baby Beretta 92. And as the 92 would be updated, first 92 to 92S, and then F, and then FS, the 80 series would be as well. And you'll see things like this squared off trigger guard appear. As I said, the safety would change up a bit. They would add a firing pin block for better conceal and carry safety in these. And they would offer these in all kinds of finishes. This is kind of a matte blue. They would do shiny blue. They would do nickeled stainless. Rib trigger on this one. Has the ribbing on the front strap and the back. The 81 is the high capacity 32. The 82 is a low capacity or standard capacity, as Beretta called it, 8-shot 32. Then they would do the 84, which was this exact same gun, but in 380. Interestingly, its magazine can hold 13 shots instead of 12. That's because 32 has a semi-rim. So without that semi-rim in 380, they were able to actually squeeze an extra round in the still albeit larger 9mm Corto Kurs. And then the 85 would be a standard capacity 8-shot version. And these would also be known as the Cheetah series. And they would also do some various 22 versions, like the 86 and 87, with various barrel lengths. So there was a really big commercial family, and these were, as I said, very popular in America during the 80s as an early carry gun. There were very few double stack guns that were reliable and safe back then to carry, and even fewer that were compact. And 32, 380 aren't ideal carry cartridges, but they sure beat the crap out of 22 or 25, don't they? It's really only in the last 10 years that 9mm and 40 and even 45 subcompacts have become available. Before that, if you wanted a small gun, you pretty much had to go with something like this. So these were sold very well. Some would also go to Israeli police who got started with the Model 70, and they actually had purchased quite a few of the Model 1951 or M951 as it sometimes was known, the 9mm as well. So Israelis kind of got hooked on it. I guess they replaced Romania as a major customer. So you'll see some of these coming out of Israel, especially the 380 version. In fact, there was a recent batch a year or two ago from Israel of the 84s. And the names would go from, for example, 81B to 81BB, 81F to 81FS, and each of these denotes a small change. And I don't remember when each change took place and which model number. But these would, for example, as I said, this was released in 77. I do know they added the firing pin safety around 82. And then they would add kind of this more, they would basically try to make it look more like an M92 FS after the M92 FS was adopted by the U.S. military. First the F version was adopted in 85 and then the FS in 88. So you start to see more, they're trying to play off their success there with the full-size 9mm in the late 80s. A lot of places report that the Cheetah is out of production. It's not, at least you can still buy these new from Beretta. They're not cheap anymore, but they still sell them new. So if they're not being made new, these are old stock. For quite a while they weren't selling well in America after all the little 9s came out, but they've kind of come back in popularity more as shooters or curiosities, including with myself. I just picked this one up when I found a good deal on one. And I thought it really kind of completed the series and shows the evolution. Even if it's not truly a military gun, it's in this whole same series, which began way back in World War I with this guy here. And you can just see each of the steps. And I'm hoping we did. We probably did, throwing up pictures of the ones we don't have here, like the 31 and 32 and 34. Sorry I don't have a 34, guys. I just don't own any 380s. I've always been, I selected 32 early on and just kind of stuck with it. But yeah, you can see the evolution here of the Beretta handgun, beginning with Tullio Marangoni, and still running through today with the Cheetah, and of course the M92 FS as its big brother. They've been very successful in the handgun market over the last 100 years. Well, that's enough of my rambling, I'd say. If you have any questions or want to talk about your own Berettas, that would be great in the comments. If you like the video, please click like. If you haven't already subscribed, we'd like you to, if you could, please. Doesn't cost anything. And, as always, man, these things are stiff, aren't they? There we go. It's why those finger rests are nice. As always, this is Misha. And please tune in again next time for hopefully more unique and interesting videos. We'll catch you then.